The Beatles manager Brian Epstein is so integral to the story of the Fab Four. His early belief in the Beatles was unrivaled, as he knew they had incredible potential. Today, we're going to show you 10 very interesting facts about the Beatles manager, Brian Epstein. Let's begin. Brian's first job related to music was as a salesman at his family's store called North End Road Music Store, or NEMS. He was made director of the store at age 21 and added gramophone records to the store's inventory, which made it one of the most popular places to buy music in Northern England. This would serve well for the Beatles once Brian became their manager, as he had experience with the record industry and had a strong sense of what people were interested in. Brian was introduced to the Beatles by a customer of NEMS. Brian wrote the following in his book explaining this moment. At about 3 o'clock on Saturday, October 28, 1961, an 18-year-old boy called Raymond Jones, wearing jeans and a black leather jacket, walked into a record store in Whitechapel, Liverpool, and said, "There's a record I want. It's my Bonnie, and it was made in Germany. Have you got it?" Behind the counter was Brian Epstein, 27, director of the store. He shook his head. "Who is the record by?" he asked. "You won't have heard of them," said Jones. "It's by a group called the Beatles." Brian was instantly charmed by the Beatles. He says the following about their first encounter. "I was immediately struck by their music, their beat, and their sense of humor on stage. And even afterwards, when I met them, I was struck again by their personal charm, and it was there that it all really started." Brian had no prior management experience when he started working with the Beatles. He watched the band perform for the first time at the Cavern Club in November of 1961 and became their manager in January 1962, making the Beatles the first group he ever worked with. Brian is largely responsible for creating the Beatles' early image. Before Brian was their manager, the band dressed as teddy boys, wearing mostly leather and jeans. However, Brian thought it would be a good idea for their public image if they wore suits, which would become their signature style in the early days. He also instructed them on how to act on stage, saying that they needed to bow at the end of each performance, not eat on stage, and play the songs coherently. Although Brian was great at promoting the band and is largely responsible for the spread of Beatlemania, he was known for being a less than average manager, and there are many examples demonstrating Brian's lack of business expertise and how it affected the Beatles' monetary success, all of which boils down to the same point, which is that the Beatles could have and should have been making a lot more money. For example, their first contract with EMI gave the band 1 penny for every record sold, split between them. That's 1 penny split between them. Many people point to Brian's death in August of 1967 as one of the early catalysts of the Beatles' breakup. Brian died from an overdose while the Beatles were on a trip with the Maharishi, and it left the band in utter disarray. Even though his role in the band became smaller after they stopped touring in 1966, Brian still served as a huge support system for the boys and helped them stay on track. John Lennon says the following of the impact of Brian's death on the Beatles' breakup. "I knew that we were in trouble then. I thought, we fucking had it now." Brian Epstein assisted in the Beatles' change of drummers. At the request of John, Paul, and George, Brian fired the band's drummer at the time, Pete Best, after George Martin heard him play during a recording session. Martin didn't think Pete was the right fit for the group, and it was Brian who took charge when it came time to executing this decision. However, Brian first offered the position to Johnny Hutchinson from a band called the Big Three, who declined it. Finally, Ringo joined after John, Paul, and George suggested him. Brian also managed Jerry and the Pacemakers, Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas, The Foremost, The Circle, Cilla Black, Tommy Quickly, and Sounds Incorporated. He would send these artists on package tours around the UK and edited their image in similar ways he did to the Beatles, going for a more polished and professional appearance. Brian was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, specifically the non-performer section, in 2014, and rightfully so. His status as the fifth Beatle shows how crucial of a role he played in the band's success. The Beatles were a social phenomenon, and this was largely because of the iconic image they sported, most of which was shaped by Brian himself. Furthermore, if it weren't for Brian's immediate draw to the band, an unwavering dedication to making them the most famous act of all time, who knows if the Beatles would have reached fame beyond Liverpool. Therefore, we definitely have Brian to thank for helping spread the Beatles' music across the world. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.